an emotional Prime Minister announced that the last Australian troops would be withdrawn from Afghanistan.
The last remaining Australian troops will depart Afghanistan in September 2021.
Now, 41 Australian soldiers died in that protracted campaign, and of course our leaders mouthed all the usual pieties about the Anzac tradition and defence of freedom. Less glamorous have been the lonely deaths of veterans who have taken their own lives either after returning to Australia or young members of the Australian Defence Force who, for a range of reasons, have found it impossible to go on. Our professional military forces are relatively small. Few really appreciate the demands of service life, but one man who has faced a brutal enemy in close ground combat and has also defeated demons that nearly caused him to end his own life is the former Commando Major Heston Russell. And Heston joins me from Brisbane tonight. Heston, welcome to the McGregor Angle. It's been too long.
Good evening, Catherine. Yes, and thank you so much for having me on.
No, absolute privilege, and spawning your badge here as well. And congratulations on, as I know, the disposal of some of that funding to help some very needy families. Well done. Heston, look, you've done some enormous data-driven work. I want to cut straight to the chase on that. 861 people having input to you through your process as to what the terms of reference should look like. There are two numbers that staggered me. One is 117 of your 861 respondents reported that they had actually attempted to end their life. And the other, I think we never should walk away from this figure. What is the ratio of battle deaths in Afghanistan to suicides over the same period?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, as you would know, I don't really like focusing just on those we've lost, but it's over 700 since 2001. And as you said before, you know, there's so many more who continue to consider or attempt suicide, or are just living with that mental health decline that we know is now a part of this systemic issue.
Heston, did you get any support from the ADF or any ESOs with your own issue? Like, you went right to the abyss. Tell us a little bit about the background and what motivated you to start looking at this space. Yeah,
well, Catherine, I mean, I am not very unique actually in my transition process, where I essentially thought I had it in the bag and conducted my own transition and took my overleave of leave that I had in my book and basically had no contact with Defence. Tried to put through my own claims to the Department of Veterans Affairs, thinking as a former Special Forces Major I'd have that in the bag, but it was just a process that you know, I can akin to many of the stands and modules we used to put on the Special Forces selection course to make people feel isolated, to make them feel devalued, and at the same time to do it over a protracted period of time, minimising communication. And it basically just led me to a place whereby you start to doubt that true sense of self, which is a large part that we need to focus on of our current serving veterans before they transition, up against you know, a system where on paper you look at $11.5 billion each financial year to the Department of Veterans Affairs, and you can't even get a phone call for 3 months, even though you chase and send emails and all this. So I basically allowed myself to hand over all of my problems to the Department of Veterans Affairs and to the support systems that were supposed to be there, and I was too proud to admit that I was failing for essentially the first time in my life. And the only thing that really brought me back from that abyss was what inspired me during my service, that purpose that is my team and those around me and those that have really been struggling within our veteran community, particularly for the last 4 years. But since 2001, as you said, as I realised I wasn't alone in my own mental health struggles, and through strength in numbers and some of those statistics you said before, it's just incredible that people are coming forward and feeling that they are able to now be vulnerable for a purpose, and that is collectively supporting our community, particularly as we approach this Royal Commission.
Now, Heston, you made a very good point in some of the data. This is a full spectrum response that you're demanding, and 60-odd%, just over 60%, reported DVA as being centre of scene mass in our jargon as to what the problem was. Not far behind was the Department of Defence itself. And give me your if you were writing these terms, what's the single point of failure? Is it that transition to civilian life that's breaking some people otherwise? And I know you've got a view on Brereton, we'll come back to that after this, but which of those two departments do you think is more culpable and what should be done?
The silver bullet, Catherine, for me really is that transition piece. And it's even, as you would know, discerning the different types of pathways that people go by. Those that are critically transitioned through to an injury or failure to pass their initial training, through to those who self-manage and self-elect to transition, and through to a myriad of others in between. And the biggest issue is there is currently a line of disembarkation between the responsibility or the moral authority and responsibility of the Department of Veterans Affairs, the Department of Defence, and then the Department of Veterans Affairs. And we go from a family and a purpose that provides us with a community and an amazing sense of self that can't be replicated out in the wider community. And then we basically are handed over, we're not even handed over, we must self-refer, which is basically sending our medical documents and files through to the Department of Veterans Affairs, which has no true context to where we've come from and is looking at us with a liability and compensation mindset and requires the person to justify in a negative context their health decline from a fresh start. You know, we're trying to basically summarise like my career into 16 years. And it's just that mindset, and you've said it so many times, Catherine, with claims now 18 months to 2 years, delaying someone for that long creates so much uncertainty in anyone's mindset, let alone the fact they've gone from a fully immersive and certain and protective culture, community and purpose. Yeah. It's the perfect recipe, as my psychologist says, to rapidly onset anxiety, depression and suicidal behaviours.
100%, and I know first-hand cases exactly in that category. One young Afghan veteran who was told they could wait 3 years for a claim because it would drive it beyond the age of 33 and their MERCA benefits would be reduced, and nearly demoralised. And the person had an exceptional service record and, like you, considerable autonomy. So we're not talking about the diggers who often have had a lot of their medical care provided on basis and so on, floundering completely. But now, as to Brereton's role in this, you've been involved in that process, I gather. You had an experience with them. And you visited Swanbourne and you've stayed in touch with the commando community. What's the mental toll on your troops that you led and the boys in the West? What have you noticed? The mental scar has been that for so many reasons, the Brereton report was allowed to be the single point of knowledge and / almost true definition in the public's eye of our time in Afghanistan. And as you would well know, you know, the Special Forces elements were there first and were there that conducted so much of the actual warfighting, given that that was what was required to be done. And it was done so in silence, in secrecy per what we were required to do. And then, you know, there are issues that need to be investigated, but there was no support from the Department of Defence when even, you know, the names of all the Special Operations Task Group commanders were published in the public, in the Australian newspaper. There were none of these rules and regulations that restrict us from being able to speak out on our own behalf or behalf of Defence during service, to be there and support those men and women who otherwise had the head of our Defence Force calling for all of them to have their honours and awards removed. So we speak a lot about this moral injury and the rapid onset of that. You know, we saw 11 suicides spike in the month post the Brereton report was released. Now, I'm not going to say that there was a direct link, but, you know, there is definitely tangible impacts of the way in which this has been managed and the way in which that moral injury has been incurred through a complete abandonment or a sense of abandonment that I'm not making up, that I know you've heard from people on both sides of the coast and people who've witnessed this within the wider Defence Force, just seeing how our, quote, tip of the spear personnel have been treated. Heston, you lobbied on behalf of Julianne Finney and Karen Bird and numerous of the others and had you got a chance to eyeball relevant ministers. Do you think, I know Alan Jones is not as confident as I am, I think this has got their undivided attention. What's your feeling? Do you think they'll come up with a TOR that you can live with, and that the mums the bereaved mums and spouses will have some chance to ventilate their feelings and be heard?
I think, and the Australian public has been the huge driving factor behind our support as well, is that, if it's not the correct terms of reference, then we'll go back to them, Catherine. And Julianne Finney has held her committee and provided their submission, and then we conducted an independent veteran-led consultation for those who weren't willing to engage with the Department of Veterans Affairs. And now all that information is with the Attorney General's Department, and it's all about now collaboration to establish those terms of reference. I just honestly think that they definitely do get it. If not, they definitely do get that if they don't get this right, they're not going to hear the end of it. So I'm going to afford them the benefit of the doubt, not the presumption of innocence, but the benefit of the doubt, and then to wait and see these terms of reference that come out. And I'm quite confident that they have all of the information they need to now make the right decisions.
And having read the voluminous deep dive you did, I'm confident they do too, Heston. So the time for excuses is over. Heston Russell, thank you for joining us tonight, and thank you for what you have done for all veterans. Have a great weekend, and look after that great dog of yours too.
Thank you so much. I will do. You too, Catherine. Thank you so much.